Hi, welcome to the Introduction to 3D Studio Max presented by 3dtroll.com. My name is Isaac Oster, and in this lesson I'm going to talk about the practical application of the editable poly toolset. So to do that, I am going to model this and sort of talk about the process, and hopefully it'll be a good way for you to see how all the stuff in the edit poly modifier toolset is actually useful. Okay, let's get going. So the first thing I want to do is create a box. And I'm not going to be super picky about nailing it perfectly. I'm going to turn the grid off just for a second. I just want to show you the basic workflow for a relatively simple shape like this. So I've got the box. I'm going to hop over to the modify toolset here, or modify tab I mean, and convert it to editable poly. And I'm going to create a cylinder, and I'll just duplicate. Actually, before I duplicate it, I want to take a look at the parameters. So I'm going to zero that out, or set it to 1 by right clicking on this arrow here, and drop it to 16. Not a real reason for that, just to keep the poly count low. And then I'm going to hold shift to duplicate it this way. Alright, so I have the basic geometry for the wrench, and I want to make sure that everything is 0. Everything's lined up in X, so I can select everything, and then down here, as long as I'm in move mode, I can just hit 0 and X, and everybody will line up. Let me turn the grid on that axis. And so just scoot it over a little like that. Okay, I'm going to convert this to an editable poly, and grab the outside faces and do an inset. And then delete those faces. By the way, there are lots of different ways that you can do this. This is just my method. So I've gone to outline, or border mode, and I'm going to hold shift and drag this down so it just about lines up with this. Select everybody. This is invert mode, by the way, and go to weld. And now I've got that whole shape there. Okay, so for this, so I could cut a little hole in here and sort of reposition the edge verts, but I think probably a better way to do this is to go to splines and just sort of make that shape. So the square on the inside, and I'm just doing a rough eyeball here. Okay, so I've got the spline, and I'm going to put a shell modifier on it. Give it some thickness, and convert it to an editable poly. Now I'd like both sides to be symmetrical, so what I'm going to do is use quick slice. Turn snap on, and make sure I have grid points selected as an option. And just cut it right down the middle. So you can see that shape there, or that edge. And turn snap off. Select these guys and delete. So now what I want to do is make this symmetrical. There is a modifier that I don't think I've talked about yet down here called symmetry. And you can see what it does. It's going to take whatever's on this side and make it happen on this side. And I can turn the light bulb here off and on, and you can see how that updates. I can come back to the original edit poly and give it another cut there if I wanted. And then when I click on the symmetry, you can see that cut has been updated in the copy. So one of the hard and fast rules of polygon modeling is you never want to have a polygon with more than 4 faces, or 4 edges. So when you do, it's called an n-gon, and the n just stands for an unknown number of sides that's more than 4. So you basically have the option of having a 4-sided polygon or a 3-sided polygon. Those are the only legal polygons. So what I want to do, I don't actually need this edge loop here, so I'm going to select one edge, select the loop button to get all of them, and then to delete this edge, I'm going to hold Control and hit backspace. So now I've got this face and this face. So I'm going to go to vert mode and select these two and then hit connect. Same thing under here. Connect. So now this is a 4-sided face, and then select those two and these two. Select. They're connect. Alright, so now all the faces are either 4 or 3 sides, so they're legal. And hop back over to my symmetry modifier, and there we go. So it looks like I might have an extra edge here. I'm going to hit Alt Q. That's Alt Q. And that will isolate everything that isn't selected. So now I just want to come over here, select this edge, and again to delete an edge, Control and backspace. And that will delete any associated vertices as well. So when you have the option between a 3-sided triangle, or a 3-sided polygon and a 4-sided polygon, generally speaking, it's a better idea to go with the 4-sided polygon. So what I can do here is cut this way, and all of these will be 4-sided faces, and that will actually aid a little later on when I do something called turbo smoothing, which I'll definitely break down for you. So I'm going to hop back over to edit poly, and I'm going to select these faces here, and the reason I'm selecting them is because I don't want any of the other faces being cut when I use the quick slice. So quick slice, S to activate snap, and I'm going to click and just drag down there. So now I've got the option for another 4-sided face here. If I can come over here, I'm going to turn snap off, do a Control select on both of these faces, or edges, and then Control backspace, and they go away. So now everything is a 4-sided polygon, which is perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Control or right click and then convert to editable poly, and that'll collapse the stack so the symmetry modifier is no longer there. I'm going to pull this down a little bit and pull these faces back a little bit. So it's not perfect, but you know, we're just you start from something very basic and it gets progressively more and more polished. Okay, so now I'm happy with this as a foundational piece of geometry. and I'm going to hit exit isolation mode. Okay, so there are the basics of my wrench. So now let's integrate all of this geometry into a single piece. So from the top view, which I can get to by hitting the T key, I think there's a little bit of a rotation to this piece. And eventually I'm going to want to weld this and this so that it's one piece of geometry. I'll also want to do that same thing probably with these edges and these corners. Maybe these edges. But everything, I think, well, this should be a little bit taller. And I'm going to hit L to go to my side camera. Left camera, actually, if you look up here, it says left. Drop this down just a little bit. And I probably shouldn't be eyeballing it, but it's okay. So, if I highlight everything, I can see I've got a center line here on this piece of geometry, and I've got a center line on this piece of geometry, but not one on this. So if I'm going to make everything connected, I need to have the same number of edges flowing across all of them. So I'm going to select this edge here, select ring, which will get, if I go into wireframe mode, you can see it's got everybody, and then I can hit connect. And that's exactly what I want. So now I have matching edges on all of the faces. So I'm going to attach these two. Select those faces and delete them. And these faces and delete them. And grab that border, hold the shift down, and extrude another edge out. And go to vertex mode, hit S to turn snap on, and then so long as I'm in move mode, which is the W key, I can just drag these over. Okay. And once they are positioned correctly, I select all of the vertices right there and go to weld. Now I need to do the same thing over here. So it looks like, in the concept, there's a little bit of a bulge around the outside of the sphere. So, turn snap off by hitting the S key. Select this edge, select ring, and hit connect. And with all of those edges there selected still, I can just scale them out a little bit. But now that I've got an edge loop here, I need an edge loop that runs along the outsides of this as well. So I'm going to grab edge, select ring, connect again, and that's fine. So I'll delete those, and then I need to attach. And for this guy, really, I should go this far out, because there's that nice smooth transition. But I'm going to have to accommodate these edge loops here, so that's going to mean an extra edge loop on either side. We'll do that in just a second. So I'm going to go to border, go into move mode, hold shift, and drag out an extra edge. The vertex mode. Turn snap back on by hitting the S key. So now I'm going to select these edges, hit loop, or I'm sorry, hit ring, and you can see what gets selected there. And I will hit connect, and that's alright. I can actually use these edges here to get a little bit more detail, but I don't want to just drag it that way because it's on sort of a curve. So I want to go to a top view, and let me try going to local. Yeah, that's better. This will just give me a little more control to smooth out that edge there. And now I've got the extra vertices down here. Make sure I'm back in snap mode. Alright. Select these vertices and go to weld. Alright, so the next thing I want to show you is it's called the turbosmooth modifier, and it's really a powerful tool. The way it works is it's based on, it'll smooth based on smoothing groups. So let me just show you what it looks like. I'm going to select all the faces and hit auto smooth, and that will preserve these inside edges, which I want to be kind of a little bit harder, and the edges between the sides here, but you can see it's this transition and this transition have been made much smoother. So with the turbosmooth modifier, the way I like to use it is to actually put two of them on here. So this is just by default what's going on, and you can see with it off and on, it's actually basically taking each single face and making them into 4 faces, and then smoothing that transition out. So already it looks a lot smoother, but I've lost some of my hard edges, and I want to preserve those. So in the turbosmooth modifier options, there is a section right here for smoothing groups. So I'm going to turn that on, and you can see it's now respecting these edges. There's a little bit of an error here, and I'll show you how to fix that in a second. So this is looking much smoother, but I still have a hard edge there. So that's off and that's on. You can see the faceting inside this is much smaller, which is why it's okay for me to use a relatively low poly ring for this, because I know I'm going to be able to add a turbosmooth modifier and make it look much nicer. So the way this gets cool is if you add another iteration, it gets even more polys and even smoother. But we still have this razor sharp edge here, which really screams out low poly model. So the next step is to add an additional turbosmooth modifier. And once you do that, it starts to look a little bit more high poly. And there's a good reason for that. It is a little bit more high poly. If I go to wireframe, you can see this. But I can easily go back to my original editable poly here, make changes, add new geometry, make new cuts, and that stuff will be propagated to the turbosmooth. So I think what I want to do now is, this is where we're going. I'm going to add the cut down the middle and adjust some of the angles going on up here. And also I want to add the lip here. So anyway, a bit more to go. So turn wireframe on, and I'm going to go to top view, turn quick slice on, go to grid, and I'm just going to turn snap on. Whoops. With face mode, I need to actually have faces selected, but if I'm in object mode, I don't. I'll just cut right through. So 1, 2, and 1, 2. So I'm going 2 above and 2 below. Even though this isn't symmetrical from top to bottom, it's just to try to maintain some semblance of regular design here. Okay. So turn quick slice off. I'm also going to turn snap off, hitting the S key, and the grid off by hitting the G key. Okay, so what I'm going to do is an inset here. And the default is fine. And I want to move them together, scale them down towards the center of the wrench. So I'm going to select this option for the pivot. And I need to, actually, I'm going to do a negative extrude. So that was extrude, those faces still selected. And now I just need to come like this and make sure they don't crash. I don't want to go too far. So that's probably fine. And you can see it update automatically when I deselect it. We go up to the turbo smooth. Now, if hypothetically I don't want this to always go to the top, I can select whichever one of these and click pin, this pin stack here, and that way even when I deselect it, it still stays low poly, or wherever it happens to be in the stack here. So I'm going to unpin that. And because I added the smoothing groups after the turbo smooths got thrown in there, it looks like it's okay, but it doesn't necessarily update the smoothing group stuff. I'm sorry, because I added these cuts here. I'm going to go back to edit poly and select the whole thing again. Do an auto smooth again. Yeah, it looks about the same. So it's sort of collapsing this corner a little bit rather than just giving it a nice smooth curve. And if you look at it, there's actually some stretching going over the top of that corner, which we definitely don't want. So the way to fix that is we need to put, let me drop it down to the unturbo smooth version. This face and this face, these faces here, need to actually be on different smoothing groups. So I'm going to go to face mode. So if I just do an auto smooth, Max will see that there's no planar change between these two faces and put on the same group. But when it goes to turbo smooth, it's going to put a little web here, which is bad. So I'm going to select these two faces and these two faces. And when you've got individual faces selected and you click auto smooth, what it's going to do is it's going to put them on their own smoothing group relative to everybody else, which is a pretty nice feature. So there's no overt change on the low poly, but when I go up to the turbo smooth, you can see we're not getting that same webbing. There seems to be an unusual feature right here, so we can take a look at that in a second. That might just be an artifact from the smoothing process. Yeah, I see it over here as well. Let's go ahead and make this gray. And I'm going to go to shaded mode. Alright, so the next thing I want to get is this little edge here. So back to the edit poly modifier, back to wireframe. And the way I'm going to get that is by selecting this ring here, doing a connect, and then, whoops. So I want to go back to world space for this. And just kind of inch it out a notch. Alright, so now I'm going to select the ring that I just made, right click on it and convert to face. And do another auto smooth. So you can see it's not quite perfect, but there's an edge there. So I think I'm actually going to get rid of this loop here. So ring is when they're parallel and loop is when they attach end to end. So I'm going to hit Control and delete. Control and backspace, sorry. And at the top. So from the top view, I went into vertex mode and I did a drag select. So what that does, it's going to get all the verts that are stacked there, which will enable me to scoot them in. And there's a little bit of a bend here. P to go back to perspective mode, and Z zooms. I don't know if I mentioned that. Okay. Alright, getting a little bit closer here. I think this part might be a little bit on the small side, so I am going to grab these verts. And I don't actually want these to be tweaked because I want to keep this the same thickness as the rest of it. And I'm going to add a modifier called an FFD. There's a few ways I could do this. I could just scale it up. But an FFD, what that stands for, they're right here in the modifier stack, is Freeform Deformer. So in this case, I don't really need anything other than a general scale, so I'm going to hit a 2x2x2. And that's what it looks like. And the reason it's called a 2x2x2 is because it's just two verts on each side. So let me show you what a 3x3 looks like, just as a example. And by the way, I want it to be added above the edit poly modifier, but below the turbosmooth modifiers. So that's what I have selected when I add it in. So this is what a 3x3 looks like. See, it's got that extra cut on it. That's more than I need. So I'm going to go back to the 2x2. And I want to expand it by hitting this plus key right here and select control points. So now I can grab those and scale them. And functionally, it's not really making much difference if I did this or if I did the just the verts themselves. But I kind of want an excuse to show this to you. So I can select local and do a drag select on these edges here and pull it out. And the nice thing about these modifiers is they act equally on the geometry. So you can get nice, clean changes in the shape, and it's distributed evenly throughout the geo. Okay. So after fussing with it, I think actually it's not the right way to go. So I'm going to delete it. Just go back to the edit poly and select those verts. Go back to world space. Actually, just change it back to local. And I think it's a little bit smoother of a transition from here to here. So go to my top view, and I'm going to put a cut right there. Turn quick slice off. Oops. And expand it out that way. So I'm eyeballing a lot of this stuff. If you actually needed this to be really, really accurate, you'd probably want to spend a little more time making sure that it was correct. This is more about how to use the tool rather than how to get a perfect wrench. But you see we're getting pretty close. I think this could actually stand to be a little bit smoother. So let's take a look at that. Probably. So I'm selecting these edges. I could just as easily have gotten one edge on each section and hit ring. And then I'm going to connect them. And I'm fine with that. Top view again. Alright, so what I want to do is basically scoot this guy down here and this one down here, and then move this in just a little bit to smooth that out. But I don't really want to change the straight line here or here, so I'm going to go to perspective, zoom out, and then constrain it to face. So that means it's going to force these edges here, or these vertices to stick to this face. So maybe edge is a better one. There we go. Okay. Alright, so the transition is a little bit smoother, but I'm still getting a pretty hard corner there, and the reason for that is because there are different smoothing groups. You can see that hard edge right there. So I should get a better result if I don't want to move anybody. When you're selecting faces and you don't want to move them, it's actually kind of easy sometimes to just sort of nudge it on accident, and that can be a bad thing. So if you just hit Q, you basically go into selection without translation mode. So I'm going to grab all these. And I want them all in one smoothing group, so I'm going to increase this. And hit auto smooth. So that'll keep them separate from this smoothing group and this smoothing group, but put them all in one smoothing group. So now, let's see if that's any better. That looks nicer, but I think I've got a little problem down here. And this is what happens when you are probably sloppy with your face selection. I think I probably just grabbed the face down there. Yeah. So I'm going to deselect those, turn this back up, and hit auto smooth. So you can see there, much better. Okay. And now that I've got this extra edge here, probably wouldn't hurt to take advantage of it. Just a little bit of, whoops, I need to turn the constraints off so I can change it. Okay. Alright, it's looking pretty good. Next thing I want to do is put a little edge around here. So I'll just select this ring, do a right click, convert to face, and give it a little tiny extrusion. But it's still set to negative from this operation, so I'm just going to pull it out a little bit. Okay. And then this and this, do a ring selection there, and convert it to face. So it looks like there's really only a separation along here. So I think what I'm going to do is go back to edge mode and deselect these edges here. And then with all of these faces, I'm just going to collapse them. Or edges, sorry. So we will do an auto smooth on this. And auto smooth on that one. And then in the process of doing this, this top face is no longer planar, and it really needs to be planar. So I'm going to select ring here, and then click, I think it's Z. Yeah. And that'll just flatten everything back to Z. And same thing over here, and hit Z. So you wouldn't want to do this in one operation because it'll flatten them together. Okay. Back to turbosmooth. And there you see we have that nice little lip there. It did kind of screw up there, but that's okay. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is add the little grabber teeth inside here. So it looks like having this extra loop in here wouldn't necessarily be ideal because you're paying for these polygons without actually using them, but I think in this case that might actually be worth keeping. So I'm going to do a ring and connect it and pull it in a little bit. And then basically go through and select every other one of these faces. And if you remember back at the beginning, I made it 16 faces. When you do something like this, it's usually a good idea to keep that face number even. It doesn't really need to be a huge number, but you can always turbo smooth it. And there's a few other techniques that are similar to turbo smooth. Turbo smooth is just my favorite. Pull that out. Okay, so that might work. But what I want is for this edge and this edge to be pretty hard. I want them to not turbo smooth. So I'm going to need to do a convert to face and then grab all of these, and I basically want every one of these faces to be on its own smoothing group. So I'm going to take the auto smooth and make this very low. I'll just try 0. Okay. So I know I don't have as many teeth in here as there should be, but I kind of don't want to add all the extra geometry going over the outside here to support that. last thing is this needs to be a little pointier. So go back to the top view. And there you go. There's a wrench.